Thanks for staying with us after this long day on impact measurement and CSR and so on. Well, someone once said the problem with forecasting is that things will happen in the future. And this is the problem of our session right now, that we want to talk about future themes and priorities. And I would like to welcome Przemysł Porybeniuk from Danone, Poland. He is Director of External Affairs and Sustainable Development. Take a seat wherever you like. He told me before that Danone in Poland is an SME. So we have an SME perspective as well on the panel. We welcome Saskia Wallret. She's Senior Advisor at Essentia and has a background in the chemical sector. So we have food industry and chemical sector on the panel. We welcome Jean Notre Dame. He's Senior Advisor at CSR Europe. He's here. I know that he's here. Yeah, here he is. Thanks for coming. And Sue Bird. She is Policy Officer at DG Employment and Social Affairs, and she's been one of the big players and one of the promoters of the new CSR communication that all of us know. Before opening the discussion, I would like to present to you a few insights from our Delphi study. So what is a Delphi study? Actually, we tried to implement in the impact project also one work package that tried to look into the future. So what is unique about this study, we include stakeholder perspectives as well, while other work packages mainly focused on corporate perspectives. We involved scientists, NGOs, labor unions, business associations, and so on. In the orientation of the Delphi studies was that it was forward-looking. We were asking for trends, we were asking for future expectations, and we had a validation through 2 rounds of feedback from our experts. So how many experts? Well, basically we approached 2,500 experts. Yes, you can find 2,500 CSR experts in Europe. 1/3 from research, 1/3 from the business sector, and 1/3 from stakeholders. And we got a participation rate of about 20%, so 545 experts participated in this panel, which is just huge. We covered all the 5 sectors the whole impact project covered, which is automotive, ICT, retail, textile, and construction. And the 500 experts represent also the European member states in a way that in countries where a certain sector has a certain high importance, also we have a high number of experts from this sector, from this country. So, the future of CSR, very easy question in the beginning. Will CSR become more important? Will it lose importance, or will it stay the same? 60% of the experts said CSR will become more important. 36% said it will not change importance, and only 4% said it will lose importance. If we have a look at the sectoral spread, the expectations concerning the future of CSR are the most optimistic one in retail. 71% of the experts expect an increase of importance of CSR in the future. In the other sectors, it's rather similar as to the average. What will be future themes and priorities for CSR? Well, we asked our experts first about the effects a certain sector has on the environment, on quality of jobs, and so on. I will show you just the results concerning environment and quality of jobs. So we asked them, how high are the effects of your sector, that you're an expert of, on certain environmental issues? So this is about the effects of the sector. And then we asked them, well, how high are the impacts of voluntary activities on improving these effects? So on the one hand, we wanted to find out where are the points where the sector really has massive effects on the environment, and on the other hand, where do voluntary activities play a certain role to improve the situation. And we can put this into a grid, and we can see how our experts assess how it is today and what they expect for the future. So for example, when we talk about CO2 emissions from core production processes, right now they would say it is an area where the sector has a little bit more than average, it's in the middle. It's not really high, it's not really low. Environmental effects and the impacts of CSR are rather of the same dimension. How will it change in the future? Well, they would say there is no increase of corporate effects to be expected, but CSR will become more powerful, so this gap, which was not really a gap, it was same dimension, it will be even closed. So CSR will be able to deal with these challenges. Similar results when we talk about CO2 emissions from production use phase. So when you use a car, you use an ICT device, you use a building, then there are certain CO2 emissions. They are again seen as of medium-high importance. These environmental effects and the impacts of CSR are similar, and things will get better. CSR will become more powerful and the effects will be slightly reduced. When we think about waste from core production processes, it's a similar shift. When we have a look at raw materials, it's different. The issue of raw materials is perceived now as being of medium-high importance, while the impacts of CSR are not as high as the effects. And in the future, this gap will not be closed. And if we have a look at rare metals, substances which are used in the ICT sector, in the automotive sector, and so on, this gap will even increase. So the effects will increase, but the power of CSR will not increase accordingly. If we have a look at environmental impacts in the supply chain, again, a gap will be closed. And if we have a look at land use, an issue which is very important for the construction industry and for the retail sector as well, because when you build big shopping malls, you have some impact on land use. This again is an area where the gap will not be closed. When we summarize this, we see that there are two areas where obviously the gap will be closed, which is CO2 emissions from core production processes and from product use. We have two areas where it will stay rather the same, waste and environmental impacts in the supply chain, and three areas where CSR will not increase its impacts in the same way as the effects are expected to increase in the future. So this was about environmental effects. Well, I know you can do the same analysis now on sectoral basis, but we would need 2.5 hours to present this. It was only a very rough overview. When we have a look at the effects on quality of jobs, so what I changed now is this scale. We now talk about quality of job effects of the sector and the impacts of CSR on these quality of job issues. Then we see that there are 3 quality of job issues where the effects and the impacts are medium-high. And this is basically how CSR is understood in the area of quality of jobs. It's about safety, health, working conditions, for sure, construction sector, that's an important issue. It's about skills, lifelong learning, and it's about work-life balance. Then we have certain areas which are of which have lower effects and lower impacts of CSR. This is about, for example, intrinsic work quality, human rights, diversity, and so on. And then we have 2 areas, job security and wages, which are perceived as of high effects but not high impacts of CSR. And if we have a look from now to the future, it was very funny to see that all of these things move in the same direction. And we were very astonished. We said, okay, how come? How come that all of these things move in the same direction? And then we had a closer look at our 3 groups of experts. 2 of them really share different views. While on the one hand, the corporate view is very optimistic, the stakeholder view has a tendency to be pessimistic. While corporate experts said, well, CSR has high impacts and it's okay, the stakeholder view is much more critical. I think this mirrors also a certain kind of tension between corporate optimism and criticism from labor unions. So based on these and many more results, we built future scenarios for these sectors. And these 4 different scenarios we think have a certain kind of likeliness. One scenario which would link environmental impacts and quality of job impacts is innovation. In many cases, radical innovation, new technologies and materials have the potential to boost European competitiveness and to improve the environmental effects, and they would require high qualifications. So this is one scenario. Technologies can solve everything. You find this, for example, in the automotive sector when it's about e-mobility. You find it in the ICT sector when you have smart metering and smart grids and smart cities and smart everything. Then you have a different scenario which is about societal change. This means to involve society, to involve consumers, to involve stakeholders. These change of habits and consumption patterns could be a driving force for future scenarios. There could be even a scenario downturn. Well, basically the textile sector suffered from such a downturn during the last 2 decades. And there could also be a potential for a downturn of automotive industry. We know that the production capacities are much too high on a global scale. So the question is, which automotive industry will suffer? The European one, the American one, but there will be a downturn, no question about that. And it could also be a question of a downturn for the construction industry. We saw this in Spain, for example, and in Italy after the crisis hit these economies. And there might be a very easy scenario, more of the same, as we know, as we've done by now. When we talk about impact measurement, we also asked our experts, should impacts be measured? Well, concerning the environment, 65% said yes, impact should be measured. A certain share said, well, I don't know. And just a very low percentage said, no, it shouldn't be measured. And there is no huge difference between business experts, stakeholders, experts, and researchers. While concerning quality of jobs, we again see this gap between business and stakeholders. 42% of our experts from the business sector said impacts on quality of jobs should be measured. So this is a minority, while 58% of stakeholders said yes, they should be measured. So what are these challenges now of measuring impacts? We talked about this issue yesterday, and I heard similar statements this day. Well, it's about complexity. Basically, when you want to measure impacts, and we have single unit impacts, an impact which is just measured in one unit, then it's very easy. When we talk about CO2 emissions and climate change impact, it's very easy. You can just calculate it. When you have multiple unit impacts, when we talk about raw materials, then you don't have one figure, you have 1,000 figures. For each different substance, you have one figure. It's much more difficult for a company. For example, I would say from the chemical industry, when you have such a broad diversity of substances in the production chain, then to measure the impact of each 10,000 substances that chemical industry produces. You have multidimensional impacts, for example. You have impacts on the environment and on society and on the economy at the same time. So then you have to deal with trade-offs. Some effects might improve, some might get better, some effects might get worse. Then, on one more level of complexity, you have shared impacts. You have impacts which are not caused by one company, but by a collaboration of several companies. We saw this, for example, in the retail sector in interaction with the construction sector. So if you build a new shopping mall, now who's responsible for that? Is it the municipality that says, this is an area where we will build a shopping mall? Is it the construction company that builds it? Or is it the retail company that runs it? There's a shared responsibility. You see the same also in supply chains. And then you have societal impacts, even systemic effects, when companies change practices. For example, how the ICT sector changed our habits, our way of communicating, our structure, what friends are. Well, you can have 800 friends on Facebook, you don't know one of them. So these are change of habits, and these are impacts on society that companies could also be held responsible for. So this is what we found out in our, well, it's just an appetizer. What we found in the Delphi study. We will continue working on this Delphi study because we are now in the second round of asking our experts, and we have some questions that we would like to discuss with our panel. You raised your hand. I think you want to ask. Yes, please.
And that is, what would have happened and how would the answer would have looked instead of asking 2,500 CSR experts, only financial analysts and CFOs?
Well, actually, we asked 2,500 to participate. We have answers from 500, okay? And I don't know, but it would be a nice research project to set up a comparative design with experts from the financial sector. It would be great. We tried to involve several of them. We approached, well, I don't have the figures at hand how many of these experts come from the financial sector, not a lot. I think there will be 10 or 15 out of the 500 coming from financial industry. Could be, yeah, but would be an interesting research design. One more question for clarification, yeah?
CFOs and their reaction to CSR, and it's on the increase here in the US as well as in Europe.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Okay. Well, it was just a comment. There was not so long ago by Deloitte and Ernst & Young a study on the attitude of CFOs to CSR. And both studies show that their attitude is on the increase in the sense that about 20-25% think that they should consider it, that it has impact on the bottom line, and that they should consider it in their optimization.
We prepared a set of questions that we sent to our panelists concerning the future of CSR, and we would like to have one round of statements from the panel, and I would leave it up to our panelists which question to pick out first, and then we will ask you to get involved into this debate. Our first question set is about how will CSR look like in 2020, what are best case scenarios, what are worst case scenarios, what are driving forces. So what future do you expect, and on what does this future depend on? Then the second set of questions is, well, we have a lot of findings in our impact project. So what? What does this imply to the future of your individual organization, for Danone, for CSR Europe, and so on? And how should corporate impact assessment and management, which we think is a concept that derived out of this impact project, which is a management approach that derived from this impact project, how could this corporate impact assessment and management be encouraged and promoted in the future? So these were the three questions we prepared. Well, who wants to start? Ladies first, perhaps? Sometimes an advantage, sometimes not.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Well, to answer with the first question, how will CSR look like in 2020? I will obviously talk about how we see it as a chemical industry in Belgium, as I represented the chemical industry, and I think it will indeed further grow. Why? Because I believe in the chemical industry, we have already a long track record in voluntary agreements. I refer to the Responsible Care Program, which was a voluntary agreement specifically more on HS&E issues, which already started off in the 80s, and from there on it has only evolved and it further increased. It then went on to product stewardship, and then where responsibility was taken along the supply chain. And actually we see now that more and more companies are also now implementing sustainable development, and that CSR is becoming more and more common practice. There are quite a lot of driving forces for that, in my opinion. Just as with the Responsible Care Program in the past, basically the industry was forced to open up and to share more information because of the, let's face it, negative impact that the chemical industry had at that time. And industry has seen the advantages of the Responsible Care Program. And also now we see that there are quite a lot of external forces which in fact stimulate us to incorporate CSR as a part of doing business. Just to name a few, on the first thing is on the social aspects. We are really facing enormous challenges in our industry to attract sufficiently young people because due to the demographic changes, which are well known, and I think it is CSR will just become more and more a norm. Companies will have to be attractive to young people, and that can only be if you're really implementing CSR. We are running various programs nowadays already to stimulate youngsters. And I have also voluntary programs also on the keeping the elderly people longer at work. There is also a lot of actions which are being taken by the industry at a sector organization, but also at lead companies. So that's one driver. Another driver is that yeah, we need to stay competitive. And to stay competitive, I think for us the innovation is crucial. And that's where, and as a European chemical industry, we can differentiate ourselves from other regions. And many of our companies are really developing innovative solutions for also the challenges of society. And in that sense, there is also a kind of social responsibility which has been taken by the companies. On the environmental side, we always have to keep ahead of regulations, and there are already now voluntary agreements which are made with the government and our companies to avoid additional taxes, to avoid additional regulations. So yeah, I think there are many driving forces which indicate that CSR will further gain importance in our industry.
Okay, so what I heard is that the main driving forces is skills and qualified human resources,
Yes?
innovation, and avoiding regulation. These are the three.
Yeah.
Yep, yep. Is this the same for food industry?
I have a longer list of 5,
Okay.
but before I do so,
Well.
I need to confess that the last time that I spoke at the same conference with Jan, sitting next to me, after this conference I had to change my job. So I fear what comes next week to me. And I haven't seen him since that time. So the stakes are pretty high for me. One more thing to how you introduced me. From the European perspective, I represent a small and medium enterprise. Danone in Poland, that's about 250 million euros annual turnover, 1,200 people working. For the Polish environment, and this is my context, I will not speak on Danone globally. For my context, this is a large multinational. So just by way of context, I believe that when you pose that question, I just thought to myself, I don't have a bloody clue. However, I would tell you what I would love it to be, and maybe there is a hint in this. I believe that CSR will be a lot more consumer citizen driven. When we look at consumers, we look at them. But we are looking at brands, we are looking at products, we're looking at consumers from our perspective. What we see is a tremendous change in the last few years of how our products are viewed at, how they're consumed, what is the price-value equation, and what matters to consumers. So we're looking at the value chain, at the upstream, how our products are made, environmental protection. If you look at the land use, this is truly important for our business, for the agribusiness, how we use water, how we use resources to produce and to deliver our products. So for me, this is an upstream and a downstream as well. What happens to the waste that is created with the products that we consume, because this is mass market. So this is the first one. Second is, it's the industry relevance. When I look at the impact assessment and measurement, I believe that this will be a lot more than it is now, industry clustered, because it's very, very hard to compare food and say automotive or chemical still, because it plays a different role for the consumers as well as for the governance of the business that you're in. Third one is it will be a lot more strategic. I very often hear, well, you've just embarked on the CSR thing, and I'm just saying, no, this is really part of the DNA of the company, with already identified areas, actions, decisions, and ways of measurement and ways of improving our performance. which is to be responsible and sustainable, and not that's not an add-on. So it has to be strategic, but also from the other perspective. The perspective is that it has to turn the responsible business practice to create strategic advantage. And this is where I'm getting into the consumer. Again, if at the end of the day the consumer does not value our strategic sustainability, this is going to be a lot more short-sighted, because it will lack the investment from the investors into the company. And I get to hear this. I sit on the board of Danone in Poland, which is quite unusual, to represent these issues. And my financial director asks me, how many more pots of yogurt will you sell because we are doing CSR? To put it in a cynical way. Okay, and that is the challenge. I can tell you that I've been with the company for over 10 years, and sort of 3 years after we embarked on this, which of course was part of the spillover from Group Danone and also our own activities that we developed locally, he said to me and said, you know, I believe that we are doing good things. And sometimes I don't really know the value. I just get this gut feel telling me, hey, I mean, that's good. But I have got some answers why he thought this way. This was about the fact that his son at school was approached by somebody else saying, oh, so you're working for Danone and you're doing this great program. Okay? But then he maybe did not see this in the numbers, but we were able to prove that some of the value of the image and the change of the proximity, emotional proximity of the consumers towards the brand was actually showing some improvement. It has to be balanced. That's my number 4. Balance between regulation and between voluntary and, I would say, opportunistic activities. Of course, what I can say is that I see that the real change in business actually comes from 2 things: from the regulation or from the pressure, from the consumers, activists. Otherwise, it's extremely hard to bring about change. And I mean substantial change, not just sort of technical change. It is vital, but it has to be, and I believe it will be balanced. And last but not least, it will be, I believe, dependent a lot more on innovation. And innovation in terms of creating products with consumers, not for consumers. The old model of, oh, well, let's look at some insights, consumer insights, and maybe we do this, and then we'll have a group of consumers, we'll check it on them, put on the market and see works, doesn't work, stays on, or we take it off. I think that this will be a lot more of a co-creation process, and we already see quite a lot of this. The way of communicating with consumers will change, and it is changing now. If you look at the changes in advertising on the whole is starting to stop working. It is the way that, as you said, you can have friends on Facebook that you have never met, but it's your choice, by the way. And the same goes with how we communicate with consumers, and based on what they take their choices. And last but not least, changes in business models. If we look at cradle-to-cradle business models, which are a lot more sustainable. I mean, these are those that I believe will be at the forefront of change for companies as well as for consumers, which to me seems to be one of the most important stakeholders that we need to look at the end of the day, because he and she pays for my product every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, what I heard now from both representatives of industry was that you were addressing policy making. So you were saying, okay, we do CSR to avoid more pressure, and you talked about balance. So it's something as a kind of parallel innovation which is asked for. Innovation on corporate level and innovation on policy level. So this is perfect to ask you, Susan, for your statement next.
Yeah, okay. You want me? Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sue Bird from the European Commission. And I work for DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion, where for the last few years I've been in charge of our corporate social responsibility policies. And like a dutiful servant, I'm actually addressing all of your questions, each one in turn. So quite a systematic approach here. So first of all, by way of introduction, to say that the Commission wrote a communication on corporate social responsibility in 2011. And the background to that was the economic crisis, of course, because the crisis started in 2008, 2009, as we know. And so our communication on CSR was written in the middle of that crisis. And I would say our outlook at the time was that we needed to be cautious in respect of the crisis, but at the same time we felt that there was still an opportunity for CSR activities and for CSR impact. Which is what we're talking about today. And of course, we're in the process of implementing that communication now. And perhaps before I address how will CSR look in 2020, the first question there, perhaps I could give a few words of my own insight, if you like, from my own professional background on how I a scenario for 2020 and where we will be economically and particularly in the European Union. And I do think there will be a rebound in economic activity. I believe that will be so as we see our way through the crisis. And in the European Union, that will be pushed by greater innovation, continuing high and complex use of information and communication technologies. But I think at the same time that will be counterbalanced by an increase in influence of the Chinese, Indian, and, for instance, South American economies, the famous BRIC countries. I think they will come to the fore and play more and more of a role in the global economic environment. And I think at the broadest level, sustainability will be an open question at that point. You know, will companies' main concern be profit seeking? Or will there be a genuine progressive commitment to profit and social well-being, profit and sustainability, profit and environmental consideration? So that's my broad view of the possible economic outlook in 2020, in the year 2020. That, of course, is the end of our Europe 2020 strategy, which is probably one of the reasons why 2020 has been chosen as the year. So that is key for the European Union in other ways as well. And how about corporate social responsibility? How will CSR look in 2020? Well, I believe that CSR activity will have increased at that time, and the nature of the profile of CSR at that time will depend quite a bit, I think, on the media and awareness raising that has been done, the extent to which awareness has been further raised. My colleague on the panel here talked about consumers and the importance of consumers, and I would say that is important, but I think they are very much affected by what they see and hear, and the media will be a key player in that. And hence, the extent of companies' social license to operate on the basis of their reputation, their brand, and their attention more broadly to quality and sustainability, I think will be important in a time when I believe even so CSR will have increased. I think there will be tensions though. Because in some of the least developing countries that we have now, I'm thinking in Africa, for instance, West Africa, where they're conflict-ridden and the rule of law is very fragile. I think in those countries there will have been improvements in the situation there, in the economic, social, environmental situation. But I wonder how those companies that are going to be investing in those countries will in fact invest. You know, will they draw the lessons from the past and invest sustainably, Or again, you know, will they seek to reach the bottom line and have lower costs as possible? You know, what will their low social license be operate be in those circumstances? And the same, so that would be outside the European Union, but within the European Union, for instance, I think we're going to have a further concentration of economic activity in urban areas. And the same considerations will apply. You know, when companies have the opportunity to invest in the poorer parts of our urban areas, if they choose to do so, will they invest sustainably or won't they? And then CSR in the year 2020 will be affected by public finances at the time, and I do believe that in as much as we are in still a difficult situation as far as sorting out government debt is concerned, then there will still be competing priorities in Europe 2020 on government finances, on government expenditure. So the extent to which sustainability can be promoted, I'm convinced it'll still be there, but it will definitely be in for tough competition with other priorities. And then another thought about our international and trade relations. The European Union has a number of free trade agreements with different countries in the world, and those agreements, those trade agreements, more and more are incorporating CSR clauses. And by 2020, we shall know a little bit more the extent to which those have had an effect, an impact, if you like. And so I think we will have started to see positive effects, but I think at that stage there will still be quite a lot to do. So what about the best scenario then? And I would say that the best scenario would be something like this, would be that all stakeholders would seriously tackle, for instance, climate change. Let's look at the environment first of all. In the best scenario, all stakeholders would have seriously tackled climate change, and globally, broadly, our temperature increase on the planet would have stayed at 2% roundabouts. 2 degrees centigrade on 2%, 2 degrees centigrade. My second point would be that we would have emerged from the recession, we would have learnt our lessons in relation, all of us, stakeholders, particularly companies, on ethics and social responsibility, and we would be acting on that. And so the economy, society, the environment would be on a firmer basis for sustainable development than it is at the moment. And the worst scenario, what would I say would be the worst scenario? The worst scenario for me would be that somehow we have started down the road of losing control of climate change, heading towards maybe 6 degrees centigrade plus increase in world temperatures, and with potentially quite significant effects on biodiversity, and then on population as well, in relation to possible population movements in the long term, which would be really radical in terms of economic, social and environmental development. And then on the social side, which of course is what my DG is more concerned about, is that companies would, in one way or another, continue to exploit labour. I mean, we still hear many stories today. You know, our NGO colleagues and non-governmental organisations are still very good at researching case histories of abuse of human rights in Indonesia or in Africa or China. And it could be the case. It could be the case that we haven't made much progress in that area, that there still is a lot to do in 2020. So that would be some of my worst case scenarios. And some of the driving forces or leverage points. I suppose I have to say from my perspective that the government engagement and the extent to which, for instance, when I think of my own organisation, we're coming up to the end of the present European Commission next year, and we'll have fresh parliamentary elections. We'll have new commissioners in place towards the end of next year. I don't know at this stage what priority will be given by those commissioners, by that European Parliament, to corporate social responsibility, but it's obviously very important to me personally, but it has an ongoing effect on our stakeholders and the stakeholders that we regularly engage with as European Commission. So government engagement is important, and then companies' willingness as well. Which way will companies go? Where will the wind blow? You know, will there be this greater attention to the need to have this social license to operate? Or will companies feel that you know, the results of the crisis have meant that really, you know, they need to, in English we say, batten down the hatches, we need to take care of costs, we need to really concentrate on gaining market share. You know, which way will they go? Questions of companies' willingness. And then also, point I mentioned before, the power of the media. Use of information and communication technologies. What is the next stage of the profile of information provision? You know, how are we going to gain and receive our information looking forward, and what sort of effect is that going to have on us and all of us as consumers, for instance, and the influence that will have on our choices in terms of products that we buy. And then the power of non-governmental organisations, the power of trade unions. You know, how much will they have some say and some influence in our discourses in years to come. And then one or two thoughts finally on the impact of impact, so the impact of this particular project and its findings. Well, I suppose first of all, not my personal involvement, but colleagues of mine in the Commission's DG for Research and Development, as you know well, commissioned this particular piece of research, so potentially we need to take a good look at it and study it closely, study its conclusions and recommendations. And I suppose one of the key things that would come out of my reading so far of the research would be that if we are going to do impact measurement seriously, if that is something that we, CSR impact measurements, then how are we to equip organisations, individuals to do it, and who is to do that? So that would be a prime question for me. Another prime question for me would be, if we do impact measurement, we've got to be sure beforehand why we want to do it, i.e. what will the information be used for? How can it be useful not only to us, but to other stakeholders as well? And also, a question which is always not far from our heart, so to speak, as we in the European Commission work on corporate social responsibility, is the extent to which we can expect or hope or wait for stakeholders to engage in helping us to look at impact measurement and to gauge what the impacts of CSR are on European economy and society. So I'm not going to answer the third question, because that is something that I'd rather like to listen to colleagues of mine on the panel answer, and also yourselves. I'd be very happy to receive feedback from yourselves on the answers to question 3. But anyway, that's all I want to say for the minute, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving us this broad perspective on how the world and Europe and CSR could look like in 2020. Jan, what is your view on the next years, on the best and worst cases, on the driving forces?
Wow, if you want to die, stay in this room, because I have a lot. And
let's agree on a few minutes, okay?
I already feel the impact of a long day or 2 long days, so I will not make that easier. But I quickly looked to a very recent Eurobarometer. That was the European Commission taking the pulse of 32,000 citizens in Europe, but also in the United States, in China, in Brazil, in India, maybe in Japan, but it was quite an extensive survey about citizens' perception on the company's impact on society. And I know that you can do everything with the results of a survey, the same with the result of this research on the impact of CSR. But interesting was to see the differences of perceptions, putting the same questions to people there in India or in Europe or in the US or in Brazil. And I think we say it from time to time, yes, Europe has really, I believe, deserved a Nobel Prize last year, but it could also win the next one if there would be a Nobel Prize on depression. Europe will win every year. You see that in the figures, we are not that good, in a good shape, because every time Europe is scoring below anybody else. I think a piece of our history is giving good explanation to that, and I'm not too worried about that type of European mood. But still, on average, 52% of citizens think that companies have a positive influence on society. Hey, 52. Well. Then the question is about who citizens believe can most influence companies to have a more positive impact on society. So if you ask citizens in the street, put yourself in the position of a citizen for a second and try to answer the question that was put by the Commission to all these 32,000 citizens. Which actor in society will have most influence on business for them to change towards a better impact? So if you have to choose between NGOs, public authorities, company managers, or citizens, who would you rate as number one? Who do you believe they say is the player which will have most influence? Governments? NGOs? Citizens. Well, and the results are 50% of citizens believe that they, the citizens, have the most impact. 12%, the lowest rate, believe NGOs will have an impact. And in between, 40% believe it's company managers, and 36% believe it's governments or public authorities. I found that extremely interesting. And I was extremely positive when I was reading that. And then last but not least, there are many, many results. And I took another one, which is, are citizens interested in companies' impact on society? I think it is worth to consider in a day or in a conference of 2 days like this one on the results of your research. Well, 80% answers no. Yes. So you might say, as good European cynical people we are, they don't give a damn shit about it. Well, 80% say, no, we have an interest. But then 36% say, I believe I am enough informed. But 64% say, I am not informed. I'm interested, but not enough informed. So that was just as a small context setting. Then to respond at least to your first question, I can never answer a question before I visit my inner garden, my guts. So I will have some answers in my capacities as CSR Europe, but my feeling is quite optimistic. Because I believe for myself, in my surrounding, in visiting countries and not just beaches as a tourist, not at all. Also in remote places, there is an underground trend, a kind of aspiration towards what some call a more frugal society. We know that we will have to make bloody changes in the way we live and consume, but at the end we want more meaning for our lives. I want more meaning. And it might be that I have to change behavior and consumption behavior. Is it on mobility? Is it on food especially? Is it whatever? But there is that trend out there, and you see that in the way people want to revisit some of our religions or spiritual beliefs and to cook their recipe of what can give meaning to my life. And that, I think, is, en français on dit une lame de fond, très très puissante. And that is telling me that this is something that will penetrate men and women working in organizations called businesses. Because they will take that into consideration. Was it only for a very selfish reason, their own life and the meaning they want to give to their lives? So therefore, I am a little bit optimistic when I consider that. Now, if I would have to measure for myself what could be KPIs to measure the success of CSR in 2020, well then I will look first in what in CSR Europe we are doing under what we call Enterprise 2020. And it's very funny because we call that is our main flagship initiative. Almost everything we do is under Enterprise 2020. Not CSR 2020, not the Responsible Enterprise 2020, no, Enterprise 2020. That is already a kind of philosophy behind an initiative that has three strong components. One is activities we do with companies and our national networks, with a lot of stakeholders. One is about governance and accountability. Get your house in order. That was there yesterday, it's here today, and it will be there tomorrow, for sure. The same at house. Every week, or at least every day, you clean a little bit the house to make it more smooth, comfortable, and respectable. So clean the kitchen, clean the house in terms of management and governance. I think that is extremely healthy because it will help all the rest. We work a lot those days on measurement, or I would say more correctly, we are working a lot in trying to connect the financial and non-financial. Even though we know today that financial is extremely soft and that soft is extremely hard from time to time. If you take now environment or whatever things that have been considered as extremely soft, it is bloody hard now, and it is getting there into the books as well. So that is something that we are very concerned with under Enterprise 2020, connecting financial and non-financial. This is all about more integrated performance. This is about fighting obesity, not the food obesity. This is fighting the obesity of financial reports that are plenty of nonsense data. And it's fighting the obesity of sustainability reports that are also including a lot of not always very material things for companies. Maybe very nice things, but that will not make a big difference. We are also working a lot on business and human rights and how to get, in terms of governance, the agenda up to date on that one. Enterprise 2020 is then looking at social innovation. On the one hand, really looking deep about human capital, jobs and skills, and demographic change. How much can we afford a second or a third generation to be lost due to the mess of the crisis that is even politically, economically, socially unbearable? So, or we wait the boomerang to get in our face and we don't do anything, but it will come, or we are more adult. So we look at that very extensively, and it's maybe something that we have lost in the community of the CSR freaks. But I will always remember the president of the Commission when he made an appeal on CSR in '93. he was always discussing about men and women in business, considering how they can care about men and women in society. And we have been almost technocrats. Is it in the academy, in the research, in the business, in the whatever? We might get back to the roots and the spirits behind all this. So that is one big component. The other one is about sustainable living in cities. And I will not go all about that, but so we have three major pillars, and I really look forward by 2020 to see what have been scores there from a group of 5,000 enterprises that are now running under the flag of Enterprise 2020. So that is something I will look at. I will certainly look at the numbers of social entrepreneurs, social enterprises. That is the generation we should trust and support. They are reinventing the circular economy, as we call it, or whatever you want to call it. That are the people who will also affecter, they will influence genetic modification of organizations, especially the large companies. I believe in that very much, and I'm happy almost to follow Yunus on that agenda. I think he got it. I will look at the companies, the medium, large, and even small companies, and I will look at 5 things in a company. How much at top level in boards or executive committees, what is the maturity of integrated thinking? You all know about the International Integrated Reporting Initiative, but it is not the reporting that I'm interested in, it's in conducive to integrated thinking of financial and non-financial, and I would even add, beyond the financial and non-financial, what about getting it right to really use complementarity, the intellectual, emotional, and spiritual intelligence of people working in these organizations. But that is something I really would like to see in a couple of years, if there would be a kind of critical mass of companies that can show that at board level there is integrated thinking. The second thing is the CFO, and I fully buy in the remark from Harry Hummels. I think he will not be called the CFO. He will be the kind of CFSO, the Chief Financial and Sustainability Officer on a company. He will have a role to play to ensure that this is aligned. But, of course, he would a totally poor guy if the departments in companies will not be equipped with the modern tools to manage. Is it now diversity? Is it environmental related issues? Whatever it is. Is it human rights? Is it... We are at the Neanderthal time of management systems. We use what we have been using for 100 years. So we have to invent it, and that's a beautiful agenda for universities to get the new disciplines that will also deliver the new modern tools of managing these issues that we are looking at. I will also look at not the classical, and it's a huge agenda for centuries, the sustainable or the social, the responsible supply chain management, but I will look at how companies are using the power of their business-to-business relationship with their suppliers for joint ventures and joint commitments. If we want to reach scale, that is a way forward. And there are companies today that are showing that this is possible. Also on very bloody difficult issues like social exclusion, poverty issues, skills development. So that is something that I am puzzled with and I would like to have on my radar. And last but not least, strategic stakeholder dialogues. We talk about stakeholder dialogues already for 10 years. I know that. I still see a lot of companies saying we have a stakeholder dialogue and it's a bloody stupid PR exercise. And they can tell to the board on the tick box we did it. We have pumped them with arguments, we have done carpet bombarding with information. We had an answer on everything. Missed opportunities. Strategic stakeholder dialogues is very, very different. And I give one anecdote. Not to be pretentious, but we do some of these stakeholder dialogues, we facilitate them, but we are a big stone in the shoe of the companies asking us to do that for them. And when I hear the CEO of a company telling me that one of the participants, by the way, it was somebody from the Commission, telling that person has been acting as an R&D person, and even better of what I would have expected from my R&D department, I say success. So strategic stakeholder dialogues is one way to get stakeholders as part of your R&D. Talking about stakeholders, there are one stakeholder that we never see anywhere, or it's very rare, and that is my KPI for 2020, how many companies will have almost in-house anthropologists? Because what Przemek said about the consumers and the citizens, let's find out what they have to say. I think they could be an extremely interesting stakeholder. Last but not least, and I finish and I have been too long, but for the EU, I just mentioned one of the points, I had more, but the voluntary approach. I am sick of the debate about voluntary versus mandatory. So, to make my life easy, I call it the voluntary approach. You must, there's no choice, you must be voluntary. You must innovate. There's no choice. Or you are a loser, but fine. So that is maybe another reflection we could have furthermore, but the last one is about schools, but that is not here, the audience to be convinced. However, if we think that by bombarding students with a lot of rational and arguments and data about CSR or whatever you call it, it's a lot of waste. They are already obese here in their head. It's almost that they cannot think anymore. They think they have to spit out what they have got, and then they get in business and they are re-brainwashed. What about them helping, supporting, coaching them to think in a more integrated way? That is, I think, the most useful impact we can have when it comes to the role and responsibility of schools and business schools. Business schools, please come back under the umbrella of a university. Please see the value of the word university. You have taken out, you were pretentious enough to say, we got it, we make a science about that. I think the crisis is showing that that was a little bit pretentious.
Thank you very much. Simon told me that we can extend this session a little bit, so he said if you have a lot of questions, a lot of statements, short statements, then we can extend it till 4 o'clock. So now it's up to you. What do you expect? How will CSR look like 2020? Do you have any things to add, any things to ask, any things to consider? Or are you just overwhelmed? Yes, please.
Again, just 2 short comments. One, I did enjoy your integrated reporting, Jan. Not integrated, but integrated thinking and integrated sort of vision and all of that. But I'm not so sure it needs to be necessarily integrated. Like you say, business and non-financial need to be, well, why not radically thinking differently on how to conduct business? Because if you think about integrating, that means that some part of the business needs to remain intact and some part of the non-financial perhaps needs to be, I don't have a word in English, greffé on the business. I don't like that. I do like more radical thinking because I think radical thinking on certain pathways of commerce, if I can use that word, would probably be more appropriate. The other thing, in terms of measuring success in these few years, would we not want to have a democracy measure? Like, I don't know what that could be. Would it be, you know, the types of, you know, reactions from the public, or the way legislative measures have been taken, or the way people have been really bold or involved in taking new measures. I'm not a political scientist, but I do think that, you know, if this is all again done by technocrats, academics, you know, all these guys who think well but don't have the feet on the ground, it's not going to work.
Thank you.
I have a couple of comments. So in terms of how CSR will look like in 2020, I'm thinking about proliferation of existing frameworks, existing sustainability assessment frameworks and CSR frameworks, to the extent that we may get lost in the amount of frameworks we'll have around. So, so there is a question: do we need to create a framework after framework after framework? And then I see at the same time the development of the more multi-stakeholder, cross-disciplinary frameworks and more participatory and inclusive frameworks. So I see this sort of positive trend coming up. In terms of engineering sector that I'm interested in, I see the proliferation of certification systems and certification practices as a way to label CSR activities of the companies, which carries out some sort of positive things to it, like raising awareness in society, and also negative things, which are, to which extent these frameworks are representing interests of primarily businesses. And the fourth thing I sort of envision for the future is, and I hope for, is the greater role of media and academics as watchdogs for, especially in Eastern Europe, to be able to track and hold accountable businesses in the reporting.
I would suggest that we have 3 more statements and then to give our plenary guests 4 statements. Okay, 4, 5? No, we'll see.
That's mine. I really appreciate that Jan is talking about social innovation and social enterprise. In order to respond to the question about CSR 2020, let's call it CSR social impact, I would say that it's an emergency because we have just 7 years to apply for. And in 7 years, we know all that is quite difficult to achieve this kind of a goal, especially in Europe. The second item I would like to address is many times we spoke about complexity. Europe is complex today. I would like to strongly advise Sue and all the others, including the man that was speaking yesterday at the keynote address, in order to finance the social innovation, finance the universities, finance every single sector, to move toward to simplicity. Because in order to project for things like this, especially for small, medium enterprises, the access to funds in Europe is quite difficult because it's complex to talk about CSR measurement within a company, think about accessing those kind of funds. Third item, within Europe, we have too many pillars. You are DG Employment and we have DG Enterprise. Many times, unfortunately, those 2 pillars are not talking to each other. As I told previously in my panel, I was saying why we are not talking about social innovation initiative, social business initiative. Jan was saying about Yunus. Yunus is traveling all over Europe trying to convince businessmen and investors in order to think, to mindset differently in order to create such a new world, including Europe, not just Bangladesh. And because of this, employment and entrepreneurs are part of the same medal. So they need to talk to each other before they talk to us.
Thank you very much. Could you just raise your hand that 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's feasible, I think.
Thank you. I work for the Austrian Business Council for Sustainable Development. We have around 250 member companies. And what we would like to do is also to convey this idea of impact assessment to our member companies. And so I have a question to the panel, especially the business representatives. What kind of support do companies actually need to implement such an impact assessment? And then I have a second question regarding the CM. Is it compatible with already existing tools like the human rights impact assessment? Or which existing tools can you recommend to assess impact in specific areas?
Thank you. I think that could be partly answered also from the consortium. We have here, yeah.
Mirek Szlagor, Telos Poland, we are strategy and sustainability consultants. While listening to what was said during the conference, I receive and I perceive a very strong focus on external factors, NGOs, consumer regulations. But in the executive summary of the project results, I found on the first driver mentioned by the representative of small and medium businesses, the value-driven motivation. And I think this another thing, maybe the businesses, especially the corporate businesses, may learn something from that, because it's our experience is if you incorporate it into our value system, and so it's much more natural motivation to change also the environment around us. That's also the way which is our way to do consulting based on values. And maybe that's the role of the business schools to also make strong stress on values regarding to sustainability. That's my vision, my wish from the another perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, just starting with the last comment, I also think that we should stress again and again, because maybe this is a bit new to the debate, what we found in our study concerning SMEs, that you have said value-driven, but we also found that employees are really important driver and lever, and I think we should not, I mean, that maybe means something that we still have to develop apart from stakeholder consultation and so on. How can we better take up this notion, and what can we do with it? Then to the question, which existing frameworks can we use? We found in the research that at least for the 3 areas that we looked at, and especially the quality of jobs area and also parts of the environment, there are not so many frameworks existing in use and in place yet. And one of the future works, partly in the new project, but also as a follow-up from this project, should be and could be, and we'll look into that, what frameworks are there. Maybe they're not used by the companies that we've worked with in the impact, and you have mentioned one which is on human rights, which was not in our focus, but it's true that there are existing initiatives and emerging, and that it is growing. Also, for example, the Carbon Disclosure Project has some elements of this, so this will be one of the follow-up sessions, and I don't think that we entirely have to invent the wheel anew. Many of the existing frameworks at least have partly elements that can be used, but with this strategic and decisive viewpoint on impact, I think it's pretty new. Considering the question, what would I wish for, or what do I think about CSR in 2020? First of all, I hope that we're not talking about CSR but rather about corporate impacts or corporations and what they do. So I think that our project shows, which maybe has been expected by many, that this CSR as seeing something isolated, some mechanism, some instrument, that this is not, it's not resonating with the actual practice, but it's also, we see that this isolated does not really lead to that big impact, considering the effort which is put into it. So I do hope that we kind of have a viewpoint beyond CSR, but still looking at corporate impacts. And what I would hope for, and this, my last remarks, Sue Bird asked, who would be interested in knowing about corporate impacts? Why should they be measured? Who should measure them? We have proposed some ideas or some basic methodology how companies can measure it, but I am very aware that due to lack of incentives, partly also because it's just too much work depending on the size and the complexity of what you want to look at, there must be other actors that help, that assist, or that even drive and do this kind of assessment. And why should we do it? I think especially policymakers should be interested, and I hope that in 2020 we know more about corporate impacts.
Okay, two very quick things. First for Ziemek. Danone Poland was actually one of the very few examples that we found of a corporate-led initiative, in your case a partnership, that set out with social impact as its main objective. Right? Not just a series of activities, measure performance, and then see if there's a way of describing its impact. It was the catalyst for what you did in Poland. So I wonder if you have any insights to share based on the approach that you took with the partners on the health issue and nutrition in Poland. And then the second, it's around the first question, how CSR looks in 2020, and maybe Saskia has some insights to share on this from something like the REACH approach. CEO-backed, major players in an industry sector coming together to say, our social license to operate is under threat unless we raise standards beyond societal expectations. Right? It's endorsed by stakeholders, it engages regulators, and it raises standards across an industry. It's certainly not CSR as far as I'm concerned, not in the way it's been historically conceived and practiced and defined. So is that the future? Is that how we achieve scale? Business leadership, raising standards across the board in a way that is transparent and doesn't exclude other players on the grounds of market protection.
Thank you very much. So you addressed our two panelists from industry. Perhaps it's up to you to start with your final statement or final remarks, and I will keep an eye that you have a little bit more time than before and to cut off later.
Right. Okay. Just a quick background. Thank you for bringing this up. Actually, the name of Professor Muhammad Yunus appeared already a couple of times. We were inspired by Professor Yunus and his notion of the Grameen Bank, microfinance, and so on and so forth. And there was a question about the values, and also in the SMEs presentation there was the notion of intrinsic influence on actually taking up CSR, and of course I could give you a very long story how Frank Ribot, the CEO of Group Danone, actually was met because he didn't have a clue who Professor Yunus was, and neither did Professor Yunus know who Frank Ribot was, and actually they were made to meet on purpose. And after that meeting, they struck a deal that actually they will build a small dairy in not far away from Dhaka, and this was the first. Of course, they couldn't believe that they actually would do it. I believe 8 months after the plant was there, and the business model was a social business model to provide food to fortified food, actually dealing with one of the issues that the society around the factory was suffering from. Now, this was an inspiration for us, and also at the same time, we had some other inspirations, and we said, okay, Danone in Poland 1 or 2 years before we started off our venture, actually chose child malnutrition as the key area that we wanted to have our impact. And we came with a notion saying, you know, it is core business for us because we're in the food. We're focusing on one thing. So the notion of simplicity is very important. So we said, okay, we want to be active in this. not only doing our core business, this is one, but actually within the area of our core business, we would be doing something which is unusual. And we came up with the thinking, okay, how can we, in fact, counteract the problem of child malnutrition? And we came up through the inspiration from Yunus and from some other ones actually working on the bottom of the pyramid, that we want to put together a product that would answer the deficiencies in nutrition, affordability levels, because we have got a lot of people at that time, 30% of people had about €3 a day of disposable income, and they could not afford good, high quality nutrition, and being accessible to them. And actually, we were inspired also by one consultant on actually building up a model. It took us about 3 years, and we got into a partnership called Partnership for Health, where we got into the partnership the biggest discount retailer in Poland, now nearly 3,000 stores in Poland, Biedronka, part of Jeronimo Martin's Portuguese group. We got a Polish producer. Danone is not the producer, unfortunately, because we could make some money on that. And third, Mother and Child Institute, a health and nutritional institution, state-owned. And actually, we formed this partnership with one notion. The objective was to solve a social problem of child malnutrition, but in a business way. So this is a way of a social business, because it has to be a business because it brings profit. However, it's social because we reinvest the profit in the educational campaign, which is not branded with any of our brands. It is branded under Partnership for Health. So there isn't, this is one of the toughest things, that we got questions from the top management, like, why don't you sell a product of Danone? Because Danone brand brings quite substantially more value than a no brand. We have created a brand called Milky Start, and we said, okay, we will not make more margin than a single digit. So this is far less than we are trying to make on our products, in order to be affordable. It had to meet a certain price level, and we started from the price, not the other way around. It has to be sourced in Poland, and it has to have the right nutritional composition in order to be suitable for kids. The insight is that it's bloody hard work to come out from our standard business, doing business. I mean, if you're a client and you work, again, through the value chain with your client, we are a producer to Biedronka, we sell with them, and maybe you can imagine how hard it is to negotiate with these guys. I mean, it is. And we said, we put aside all our standard negotiations because we are here on a different mission. It has got the GM backing, but also we put in, on the outset of that, sort of 3 years after we started developing this, we had the owners and the CEOs, the global CEOs, actually sign up this Partnership for Health. And we have been developing this, and every single time we meet about 3 times a year, the GMs, the teams work, the operational teams work on constant basis. We say, here is our mission. So how do we then measure the effect? And this is where we had the biggest challenge. And I think that you looked at, we tried to get some sort of roughly right approach. And the roughly right approach has been that we looked at, okay, what is the level of kids that are malnourished in Poland? And then try to correlate it with our sales. I mean, we sell this product. They're actually a soup, a milk soup, dry, that you can actually get with hot water or with milk, and actually a sort of a sandwich. And we sell about 100,000 pieces a day. I mean, up until now, we're over 100 million pieces sold. Now, so 2 things. We said, okay, so then how do we correlate this? And we know we're not getting it right because we don't have enough robust data. the data about child malnutrition. We do this like twice a year. There is no statistical data by the government or any other institution. We know how we're selling, but we get the proxy through to which types of households does it get sold. So who buys them? Which households buy them in terms of their income? Because we know that the houses, our objective is to sell to the bottom of the pyramid. We're not happy if I buy it or my family buys it. It's still a great product. So this was the biggest challenge. And one more insight is that in terms of marketing, we believed that the product will sell just because Professor Yunus loves it. He actually endorsed this. That we believed that we had such a great idea, from the sort of social business perspective, that it will just fly because it is a social utility product. Well, we had to change course immediately because we said, okay, in the marketing mix, we will not do advertising. It will just sell because it's such a great product. Forget this. This was our first thinking. Nobody knows about the product. Biedronka, the store, it has 1,000 products on the shelf, and it loses there. It does not get the attraction. And the very last thing is, you cannot, we're marketing this product to people that are worse off. So you can't build a product for people that don't have the money, thinking that you're building a product for the poor. It has to be as colorful, flashy as it is to any other consumer. And this is what we have learned. And then, of course, all the rules of marketing come in, how you do it, how you reinvent, how you bring the in and out, because the competition is there, even though we have got the best price still. And we have, over the past 6 years, we've only risen prices once in order to keep the affordability level still for the people that cannot afford this. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing these experiences with us. Saskia.
Yeah, on your question on REACH, well, that's a tough one. Definitely REACH is, for me, certainly not CSR. REACH is a regulation. And yes, it has risen the level of information about chemicals which are brought into the market, absolutely correct. And yes, it has forced industry to work together and to have a certain openness and to work together throughout the whole supply chain. So in that sense, it is positive, and you do have a kind of social responsibility because you look throughout the whole supply chain up to the level where the products are used by the consumers. But I don't think this is really the way to do CSR, and it did not help us also to improve our competitiveness of our European industry, and then I'm not talking only the chemical industry, but the European industry in general. If you look at our competitiveness worldwide, because the same level of information is not required for all the products which are imported, all the articles which are imported from outside Europe into our region. And in that sense, it does not help really society that much. Actually, you need to be very conscious that you don't put too much burden onto the European industry and have a switch towards outside Europe. We did see that there is a high level of knowledge already in our business about REACH, about the chemicals, but the impact of it downstream, that is something which is still need to be worked on, and it's not well yet understood, I think. So, yeah, I don't know whether that answered your question more or less.
Sorry to say. Yeah, it's a broader question about industry leadership. I mean, if we look at the financial sector,
yeah.
How many CEOs of major investment banks, commercial banks, hybrid banks, and so on, have really come out to say we need to raise our game, we need to change the fundamentals few examples. The BBC industry has been very concerned as well, with us. So it's an open question. Is this a real pathway forward to achieve change at scale? Does it need leadership from the top to change the rules of the game or improve the rules of the game in given industry sectors?
There's certainly a certain role for the leaders there, yeah, and there are some good examples also in our industry of large major companies who have done a lot on CSR and working in a sustainable way and have an open reporting. Also within our sector in Belgium, we have an open reporting system on our sustainable development. And yes, it does help to well, be the example basically for our industry. Yeah.
Thank you. We just have 5 minutes left. So Jan, how many minutes do you need of the 5 ones?
About 10 probably. I have taken so much time, I would not abuse.
One final statement?
Well, maybe...
Yeah.
Maybe on the question that the lady there had on what the support would companies need to measure the impact. I think basically you still have to start with the basics and make people, inform people or support people to determine really the materiality of the different indicators and make conscious choices on what to work on and where they can have the largest impact. I think that is a first step to take and is important. Not do just something on CSR, but something where you know that you have an impact. You change something. Guide them there.
If I may just jump on that one, because I think it was, yes, an important question. What do companies need to what support do they need to assess the impact? And listening to Przemek and their case, I know that at a certain moment when it came to the measurement of impact, the role there in Bangladesh, that case, the role of the NGO called GAIN was extremely important. How they as an NGO was their expertise, which they had not at all, together with the expertise of some medical services there in Bangladesh, how they have been instrumental in designing the methodology for measuring the impact of that product. So there I think that is a very valuable support for companies to find the right partner that has some expertise in helping in that impact. Also, I think what companies need very, very much is to sit down with peers. Well, first, within the company, there is so much bureaucracy and walls in administrations, within companies, that is something. Very often they don't know that they have colleagues that could be really allies. But also seeing how companies, practitioners can meet the other ones who are suffering as much as they do. You know, psychologically, it's not too bad that you don't feel alone about all that. And then it's really about, when you speak about impact assessment, you assess many things. And there are, within the process, elements where you are pretty good and where a peer is less successful and where he can take from you. And on the same issue like business human rights was mentioned, in the process, there are elements where you might take benefit of what he has been experiencing, and that peer-to-peer relationship, I think, is extremely important and very underused because we have no time. We have agendas of 10 or more hours a day, and you say, I have no time. So, but we see when we do that, and we organize some benchmarks with companies, when it comes about also assessing, that is helping a lot. So the stakeholders, I think, can be really key, and also peers is something that can be very useful. Last but not least, but when people say, that is CSR and that is not CSR. I don't know what CSR is. I use CSR for the common sense revolution. Taking care in an efficient way about people and the environment we live in, I think it's bloody common sense, but then the simplicity, I don't believe in that. Maybe the simplicity, but it's bloody complex because we are limited species for the moment in evolution. So I have some worries about that. Where does it start? Where does it finish? And that is what I welcome so much with the Commission definition. Not because it's the Commission, because it's the result of 10 years. 10 years of sometimes very painful dialogues with all the NGOs and the investors and the companies and the employers who don't speak always the same language as the companies they represent, or the trade unions, the same, governments. 10 years giving a concept which is telling about CSR is the responsibility of the impact on society. Well, thank you very much, but that was not maybe the main element, but it is the process whereby companies integrate social, environment, consumer considerations and ethics in strategy and operations with stakeholders, comma, a process to integrate with the aim to minimize the negative impact or maximize the opportunities. And that is something that I miss today in the European approach. That it is still very much driven by the compliance approach and not enough by the opportunity approach. And when I listen to Przemek, that is a very balanced approach. How can we minimize the risk of malnutrition while in the meantime thinking the opportunity in entering markets we would not even have thought about? Is it there in Bangladesh or maybe in some remote areas there in Poland or whatever? So that double approach, it's the yin and the yang of a good approach. So that was maybe my final comment.
Thank you. Sue, any final comments from your side?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I picked up, I think, comments from the room that people were concerned about relationships between stakeholders. So I'd like to comment on that and agree, of course, from the European perspective in all our discussions that Jan has referred to, that I agree that stakeholder engagement and relationships between stakeholders are very important. I mean, I think we're in a world where we are in the throes of greater complexity in our relationships, both from the individual level up to the biggest corporation or the largest government departments or whatever. Complexity and diversity. And that is affected by the ways we can communicate with each other through social media and other information and communications technologies. And it's also affected by what information we receive, what information we have access to, as well as the information that we don't receive or don't have access to. So information symmetries and asymmetries. And I think it's also to do with, because of this informatization, if you like, of our relationships, the extent to which we then blur our lines in our relationships, blur our lines between different organizations. But then there's the need to know where can we blur those lines? Where is it okay to blur those lines? But where on the other hand, we need to maintain the boundaries? And I think within that scenario, I don't think I agree with Simon that it needs leadership from a particular stakeholder. I think it needs stakeholders to come together, stakeholders in the plural, to come together in their diverse relationships to bring forward a tide of opinion. Which will then have the advantage and take the day, if you like. So I think it's about tides of opinion as opposed to opinion leaders. And what are we aiming for at the end of the day? What impact do we want to see? What is the link between CSR and impact? And I think we are talking at the end of the day about quality of life for all of us, both as individuals, organisations, governments. And my colleagues in DG Enterprise, for instance, talk a lot about trust. CSR encourages trust in companies, how how can companies become more trustworthy? Well, they can through, undertaking CSR activities. So, I think these complex and diverse relationships lead to, or can lead, or should lead to considerations around quality of life, because that's what we want. All of us, in a very human need, very human way, we wish for good quality of life. And Jan talked about meaning, the importance of meaning in our business relationships and our lives more generally. And I think through this diverse and complex relationship building over years, yes, it does take years sometimes, then, these are the sort of impacts we should be aiming for and we should be examining as we look forward in terms of our CSR activities and aspirations. So that's one point. Just a very quick technical point to the gentleman over there who said, why don't DG Employment speak to DG Enterprise, I think? Well, we do. We do on CSR. I've worked for many years very closely with colleagues, opposite numbers in DG Enterprise, so that goes on. We're joint owners of the CSR communication from 2011. It was jointly written by us. And also, you talked about social innovation, social business initiative. You'll be pleased to hear that one of my responsibilities, my added responsibilities recently, is not only to work on corporate social responsibility, but to look more broadly at our relationships within the ambit of the Commission's social investment package, look at our relations more broadly with the private sector. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for staying focused. Thank you for the time, and thank our panelists for their experiences and their sharing their views. Thank you very much.